Pokémon is the biggest video game franchise in the world, but even then, you might be unaware of the many enigmas surrounding it. And after hearing Victor's story, we ask you to never download the beta version of the game Pokémon Zombie. It isn't an official game, and it isn't clear if it actually exists or not. However, many claim that it can be found around the internet, and that if you do find it, you can actually download and play it. Before Victor's life completely changed, he loved to collect Pokémon games and merchandise. He would spend hours and hours every day playing his favorite titles in the series, and would always buy the newest Pokémon game whenever it was released. However, one day Victor bumped into a strange website in Japanese. It had a black background with white lines, and images which looked like dust particles moving in the wind. Victor tried to translate the page using Google Translate, but every time he pressed the translate button, he would see a red box with strange characters. That weirded him out a bit, but he didn't give it importance. He just thought it was some sort of computer error. The only thing Victor could understand on that page was a neon green title which said Pokémon Beta Zombie and a button which said download. He clicked on it, and his web browser opened a window with strange unreadable characters. It showed only two options: download executable and flee while you can. This weirded him out even more, but Victor was such a big Pokémon fan that he decided to push forward and download the game. Once he downloaded the executable file, it opened automatically without him clicking on it, and the game started. There was no menu and no intro screen. All he could see was his player character in the middle of a dark zone, and suddenly, a text popped up on the screen. If you survive, you'll become my servant. If you lose all of them, you will die. After that message, the screen became completely red, then yellow, then sepia, and then gameplay resumed showing a strange fog. And that fog eventually dissipated, showing what seemed to be a normal Pokémon town. However, that fog was then replaced with rain and lightning, and Victor could then hear an ominous chorus in the background, as well as the sounds of some sort of creature chewing on something. Victor then tried to check what Pokémon he had, but when he tried, a strange message popped up saying, "They hate themselves. They don't want you to see them until the right time." Victor was also curious as to why the game was in English, since he downloaded it from a website in Japanese. He thought that maybe it was a fan translation of a Japanese fan game and kept playing. He advanced with his player character, and as he was walking, a random encounter with a wild Pokémon started, and it was against a level 100 Mewtwo. However, for some unsettling reason, the Mewtwo looked emaciated. Its skin was light green, its tail was purple, and had scars all over its body. The player character then threw a black Pokeball. A level 6 Charmander came out of it and looked injured, much alike the wild Mewtwo. However, the most disturbing part was that a portion of the Charmander's head was broken open, and part of its brain could be seen through its skull. The wild Mewtwo then used the Bite move, and for some reason it caused the Charmander to instantly become a level 60 Charizard, and after that strange evolution, the wild Mewtwo fled. The fight was over, and the game indicated that Victor had just earned the Soul Badge. Then, a new message suddenly appeared, instructing the player to go to the train station to take a train. Victor didn't know how to get there, but his hands seemed to act on their own, moving the player character towards the station. He went into the train and saw many other characters that looked just like him. Then, a message suddenly appeared on the screen saying, "All these characters look just like mine," and shortly after, "Creepy, is this game reading my mind?" Victor got a bit scared. For a moment, he thought that the game was showing him exactly what he was thinking. Although, he then considered that the creators just put in those dialogues for all players to see, and had calculated pretty well how most players would react. However, more text and dialogue started to appear, which made him feel more unsettled. When the train stopped, all the other characters disappeared, and Victor's player character was now alone. He got off the train and into the town he had just arrived to, and it looked completely burnt and destroyed. Then, a new message appeared, instructing the player to kill the High Command. Victor kept advancing with his player character, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Pokémon devouring their trainers. Victor could hear the Pokémon chewing, as well as the screams and cries of the trainers. The sound effects were eerily realistic. And in that moment, next to a building, Team Rocket appeared and ran directly towards the player character. There was no dialogue, but a battle immediately started. It was a double battle where Team Rocket sent out a Pikachu and a Pinsir, both level 59. The player character controlled by Victor then sent out a Jigglypuff and a Ninetales. And strangely enough, he couldn't choose any attack, and the battle went on automatically. Victor then witnessed how the Pokémon started eating each other in battle. The first one to be defeated was Jigglypuff. When its health points reached 0, it exploded, covering everything around it in blood. Then the same thing happened to Team Rocket's Pikachu and Pinsir. Only Ninetales was still standing after the carnage. Once the battle was over, a text appeared saying your Jigglypuff has been devoured. Fortunately, you still have 5 Pokémon left. Lose them, and the one who will be devoured next will be you. Victor tried to check his Pokémon team again, and this time he was able to. His Jigglypuff was no longer there. The place which should be occupied by the 6th Pokémon was now empty. Charizard and Ninetales were there, and the rest of the Pokémon couldn't be discerned since they were covered by shadows. Victor got out of the menu and moved his player character into a building. The inside seemed to be a Pokémon Center, but nobody was there except for ominous piano music and the sound of whispers in the background. Then a text appeared saying that he had to go upstairs. He did, and then he saw 3 characters: a man, a woman, and a little girl. The man seemed to be the father, and he seemed to be crying and yelling, "Why Clear? Why did I have to kill him?" The mother tried to console the man. "Don't blame yourself anymore. You had no choice. He turned into one of them. You think Victor's death doesn't affect me too? We lost a son, but we still have Lily." Victor was now frozen in shock. His mother's name was Clear, his little sister was named Lily, and the boy who they killed in the game was also named Victor. What was happening? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more horror videos, subscribe to our channel.